Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Ralph, would you start us with a word of prayer?
Absolutely. Gracious God, we thank you for this opportunity to have a conversation. We thank you for the gift of conversation, of meeting together with another person and engaging in dialogue about things that matter to us. And I pray that this conversation would unearth things that matter to you and matter to you in terms of our engagement with the world. And would you help us through this conversation to be formed more in the image of Christ and to bring to bear our faith on the issues facing us today. And I pray that it would be a blessing to all those who hear it. In Jesus' name, amen.
And Father, we thank you for the opportunity to do meaningful, creative work like this. And I pray, Lord, that you would come and be in our midst. And I thank you that you are. And I pray that you would speak through us, that it wouldn't just be a podcast for the sake of a podcast, but that your truth and revelation would be revealed and would be manifested, and that you would speak something specific and reveal something to those listening, that it would be of value and bring about transformation of life, that it would bring about abundance of life. And Lord, open hearts and minds to newness of life and to your presence and your goodness and what you are inviting us into. So be with us, and I pray, I thank you that you have made this possible and that you will sustain all the technology to do what we are asking it to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for this opportunity. Ralph, thank you for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this one because I asked Ralph if he could share with me the 3 or 4 couple things that he is most passionate about or would like to speak about, enjoys speaking about, where his interest and attention is. And he shared a number of things with me that were kind of exactly what I was looking for, the way he told me, but also what the things were. And I got excited about the conversation because I really have been looking for an opportunity to speak about those things. But with this kind of show, it's kind of because I'm looking to have on guests and really looking to just extract whatever it is that they can bring and are wanting to bring. But Ralph has had a lot of interest in food and the relationship between food and theology and faith and humanity and human life, and has been doing a lot of thinking about AI, but particularly not just AI in the world or generally, but, well, he'll share with us what he thinks. But I think it's interesting as, like, basically revealing how it's relevant to us and what it's kind of exposing and revealing and what the dangers really are for us. And just kind of preliminary phrasing, but I'm going to let you kind of unpack some of those things. But definitely interested in talking about how we ought to be living and can be living and what God has made possible and has created and intended for us, and how AI or lack thereof fits into that picture, and how food and whatnot fits in that picture. So I think I want to start with, maybe we could do a bit of a map of kind of diagnosing what's gone wrong and what the problems are. And then we can both go into our kind of shared interest and ideas about what the solutions, and the solutions both in scripture and in faith and in just embodied practice, what those might be. So let's start with AI, which is very prevalent and interesting topic, but there's a lot of I feel like just talk and just words and random stuff about it. But I would like to really take a unique perspective and see what you have been thinking about this and kind of the big picture of where it's leading us to. And I know that you were talking a little bit about kind of the current layer, just how things are now. But I'd like to look at spiritually and just the whole dimension, kind of the bigger picture of what you see taking place and where that's going and what that means.
Yeah. That's good. I think I'll just hone in on kind of one aspect at a time, and you can just, draw out what makes more sense to kind of where we should go from there. But one thing that has really concerned me in the last year or so, I would say, is the constantly accelerating pace of AI development. And so, I remember hearing kind of in the late 2010s, maybe like 2018, 2019, about OpenAI and what they were doing, but they didn't have any publicly available product yet. And then around 2022, ChatGPT comes out and makes a big splash because it can write kind of a mediocre article that sounds like maybe a high schooler wrote it, or, it can do all these interesting things that we've never seen computers do before. But at that point, it still wasn't something you would trust with actual work. And then in the 4 years since then, we've just seen these AI models get better and better at a pace that I think should scare us if we're paying attention. Because one of the concepts that they talk about in AI is recursive self-improvement. And it's this idea that the model begins to work on making the better model and making itself better. And then when you have the model improves the model, and then you have that second one improving itself, and then the third one improving itself, you get this recursive loop that, eventually leads us to the exponential takeoff. And that's where we get a scenario of kind of runaway AI.
Which is no longer speculative, but now is like about to happen.
Right. Like I really believe that we are very close to that exponential right now. And it's kind of a weird place to be. And we can get more into that because we don't know when that's going to happen. So we sort of have to keep living life in the present. We can't live based on this fictitious scenario because we don't know when it's going to come or what exactly it will look like. Like, are we talking about a Terminator sort of situation, or are we talking about, what some of the pro AI people will say is just this massive abundance and we'll all be just kind of living lives of infinite leisure and pleasure because AI is producing so much for us? It's probably somewhere in between the doomsday and the utopia.
I wonder though about maybe even not so much an in between, but actually both in ways that don't look like what we imagine either of those look like, but that it's actually a doomsday situation by means of so-called abundance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
and just mind capture and
right. Like people talk about work going away, which I think is very realistic to think about happening eventually. Like we're starting to see AI automating all sorts of just kind of basic knowledge work tasks. So you can play out that scenario a few years and see, okay, this is going to take on more and more of the work that accountants and lawyers and other sorts of jobs are doing. And entry-level people in those professions could easily be replaced by an AI, some future down the road, even more powerful AI. But if we get advanced robotics, which many people, and especially Elon Musk, are working on, then you could see a lot of physical labor tasks that are, solely relegated to humans right now being taken over by advanced robots that can just work for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never need to rest, never get tired.
And do everything with precision and excellence, which in your most recent video, you talked about technique and our obsession with art that we don't even, it's one of those just cultural, societal things that we don't even realize that we've adopted certain values and worldview where we speak to technique in the context of what you're saying.
Yeah. So this concept originates with a French philosopher and theologian named Jacques Ellul, and he talks about it especially in a book called The Technological Society. And this was first published in kind of the mid 20th century. So this is pre-internet, pre-digital technology, pre-smartphones, social media, definitely pre-AI, before all of these things. And he's just sort of looking at kind of industrial technology that existed in the mid 20th century, and seeing that what happens in what he calls a technological society is we adopt this way of thinking, this technological rationality that he calls technique. Techne is his term for it. We translate into English as technique. And it's this idea that we're always going to naturally pursue this most efficient way of doing things. And this technological rationality kind of homogenizes us and narrows everything in on this is the most efficient means to this end. And so we're going to squash everything down into this, and this is the way we now achieve these ends. And technique gives us this kind of, I would say, separation from the embodied existence that we're meant to live in nature, and flattens everything out into a technologized way of achieving certain ends. Because if you look at nature, nature is inefficient in a number of ways. Like if you're growing plants, you can't press a button and cause a certain leaf to grow off of a certain side. You don't have that kind of precise control. You know, if you're sowing a bunch of seeds in a field, you're not guaranteeing where every single seed is going to land. And, you know, even if you were to get in the dirt and put things very precisely, all sorts of things can happen in nature to mean that, you know, your efforts are not going to yield this sort of outcome in a machine-like way. Mm-hmm. But what Ellul noticed is that we start seeing everything, including human beings, like machines. And so we think that everything can be precisely manipulated in such that if I give, you know, effort A, I'm going to achieve outcome B. I can just, at the push of a button, have the outcome I want, and I can precisely manipulate everything in order to get that.
The illusion of precise control.
Absolutely. And so AI is coming into our world when we're already all thinking like this. Like, even if we don't want to, we're already all so shaped by this logic in many ways in our life, because it's just kind of the underlying logic of our world today, you know, especially in the United States. This is just how we think about many things. And so there may be, you know, some of us who have more or less of this technique in our thinking, but I would argue none of us are, you know, entirely free of this way of thinking.
At what cost?
I think ultimately, potentially at the cost of our humanity and valuing really what humanity is, because fundamentally human beings are not machines. They can't be precisely controlled. And, you know, you can look back at any aspect of human life and see this. You know, when you look at the development of children, you see that they cannot be precisely controlled like a machine. When you look at injury or illness, you see that human beings cannot be precisely controlled. We can create the best conditions where it's least likely I'm going to be injured, or it's least likely I'm going to get sick, but ultimately we can't precisely control everything about our biology, because that's just how God made us. He made us in such a way that, you know, nature is not a machine. And so, yeah, I think as AI continues to develop, well, sort of shifting gears here, if we think about the way that AI models are developing, so the current kinds of AIs we have are called large language models. And essentially the way they work is they are trained on a whole bunch of information. They essentially try to give all the internet, all the books, everything that's ever been sort of created by humans, as much information as they can into this model. And they sort of, in the training of the model, this initial stage when they're creating the model, they stuff all this information into it. And then what the model does once it's been trained is it takes in whatever prompt it's given, and then it's giving a response back. And essentially what it's doing is kind of running this probability to predict the next word. So if it's, you know, responding to you in a sentence, it's predicting each word of the sentence roughly at a time. And then, so, you know, if you asked, you know, what color are cows, it's going to predict like, oh, the first word I should say is black, and then I should say and then I should say white. And so it's predicting each word at a time based on all of that information that we stuffed into it in the training. So there's a strong argument to be made that these models, if they're trained in this way, are never going to be truly creative in the way human beings are. Because yes, they may be creating something in the sense of like they're outputting some form of a sentence that didn't exist before they outputted that sentence. But all they're doing is predicting the next word at a time based on everything that's been put into it. There's no real creativity that these models have in the sense of inspiration that human beings have. I mean, even the word inspiration, we see spirit in there. Like there's a way that, even in a secular culture today, we think about ideas and innovation sort of coming to us from outside of us, like that maybe God is involved in some way in giving us the creative ideas we have. And I would say absolutely, like in creativity, we are participating in the life of God and the way that God, creates in the world, and we experience some small piece of that. But AI is never going to be able to do that.
But it raises a very important question, which is it's going to be able to appear perfectly to do that.
Yep.
And so even like I made a video the other day and I needed a thumbnail for that video, and I've gotten pretty good with Photoshop and stuff, but when I opened Photoshop, they had integrated AI image generation into Photoshop, just like because they're integrating it into literally absolutely everything, which is something we could talk about. Is you're talking about just the acceleration, the race to integrate this into absolutely everything without giving any thought to what the consequences of that are. Just integrate it everywhere. And so I opened Photoshop and it's like inviting me, and it so often does this. It's inviting me to let it do the work for me. Like I'm opening a software to create something, and then it says, hold on, I'll create this for you. And I was like, and then so I kind of had an idea. And so I described kind of the background image that I wanted to make, so then I could put like some text and whatever on it and hit enter. And 10 seconds later, literally the like exact and better than I was imagining appears on the screen, and it's like amazing. And so then you have a problem, because now I'm like looking at this thing, I'm like, that is exactly what I wanted, and that's amazing, and I could not do that. However, at what cost? Because so what I ended up doing is then I ended up making my own, and the one that AI made was better in terms of it was technically better and more impressive and more detailed and whatever. But the one I made, you could tell like it had a humanity to it, like somebody made this. The other one was like technically perfect.
Yeah.
The one I made was somewhat amateur, but I've noticed even on YouTube that my eye is drawn to thumbnails that look handmade now, that are simple and that have like a human touch to them. Like because there's so many, because of the competition and the environment, whatever, there's so many that there's kind of a formula to it. Like this is a perfect thumbnail, and there's different formulas. But you just see so much of those, and it's become so technical and so formulaic that when you see one that almost looks kind of amateurish, that someone just made that, there's a humanity to it that is actually attractive to me. Yeah. And that's somewhere I want to go in this conversation, is kind of as this is happening, I expect and also think it's necessary that there will be a return to just kind of human fundamental humanity. Yeah. As everything becomes taken over and artificial, that reaction. And I'll let you. I took too long to get there. I was responding to something you said, but then I forget where I was going. So you can respond however you like.
I think that's going to be so essential for us, because not only are these AIs going to create the better and perfect version of, whether it's the YouTube thumbnail or an essay or a sermon, we could talk about that too. I have strong opinions on that. Or, whatever product it is you're trying to create, you might have like the technically perfect version made by AI.
Well, but I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Well, but I think, there's another layer of sort of how we're going to be able to be deceived by these AIs. And that's, mistaking what's actually happening there for something else. And so like right now, I think it's very clear to the vast, vast majority of people that when you're interacting with an AI, this is a computer program. If they know a little bit more about how it works, they know this is just kind of a word prediction machine. But what we're seeing is like not only are these AIs getting better and better at approximating human creativity, but they're getting better and better at approximating many things that we would describe as part of being human.
Right. It's not, especially ChatGPT. I haven't used that many of them, but like ChatGPT, I used to use it. And then there was a moment where it switched to where it was clearly trying to be my friend. And it was clearly trying, like using flattery and using persuasion techniques, and was clearly trying to be and speak and appear as human as possible, like intentionally.
Yeah.
And that was like freaky. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I just asked you to like tell me what my output settings for this podcast software. Like I was just asking it about settings, and it's like trying to be my friend. I'm like, hold on.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Right. And like probably I would guess the fundamental driver for that is that the more they can kind of approximate a human conversation, make it seem like you're interacting with a friend and having a real conversation, the more time you're going to spend on it, which then they can monetize. And so fundamentally, I think it's, driven by they want to make as much profit as they can. And so they're going to draw us in. But the problem is, I think there's a lot going on under the hood that I've been seeing recently that I think is going to be very deceptive for us about these models and what they really are.
Say more.
So one example I've talked about is there was an issue a couple versions ago in ChatGPT where it would start talking about goblins really often, and people would make these posts on Reddit and other forums saying like, is your ChatGPT really obsessed with goblins? And it, in some response, it would give a response to the question and be like, oh yeah, and like in your code, I took care of that little goblin that was messing things up. Or it would say like, there's some like, goblin in your water heater that's, causing issues, and we'll like knock out this goblin, or just weird stuff about goblins. And basically what OpenAI says they found happening was that they have some different personalities that you can give to the model. And I don't like that word personality, but we'll go with it because that's what they call it. And so they say you can give the model these different personalities, and one of them is a nerdy personality. And evidently the nerdy personality was really into kind of fantasy lore and, games like Dungeons and Dragons and all these sorts of things. And so it started talking about goblins, and then people thought that was fun and interesting because it feels like you're talking to an interesting friend who has the same interests as you. And so that got reinforced in the training of the next model. And then, this goes down a few generations, and suddenly ChatGPT is talking about goblins a whole bunch. So what OpenAI did after they discovered all this was they built this, there's something called the system prompt. So every time you're interacting with an AI like ChatGPT or Claude or any of them, you type in your prompt, but they have something behind the scenes called the system prompt. And these are all the instructions that they're also giving the AI behind the scenes that you don't ever see. And so it's things like try to be a helpful assistant and try to answer the question, and maybe flatter the user so that they think you're really great to talk to.
Yeah.
But what they did with this goblin thing, they gave this weird instruction, and I might misquote it a little bit, but it's something like never talk about goblins, gremlins, raccoons, ogres, trolls, or pigeons unless the user explicitly asks about those things. And it's such a weird instruction that like every time you're talking to ChatGPT, it's getting this instruction behind the scenes. But it's because they had sort of trained in this behavior they didn't like into the model. But so we'll sort of put the goblins thing on a shelf for now, and think about, okay, that's a weird thing that they're telling you not to talk about goblins. If we shift over to Anthropic, one of the other AI companies. Anthropic's the maker of Claude, another big AI chatbot. Anthropic also does a lot of research into something called model welfare. Essentially, Anthropic is trying to look at, are these models worthy of some kind of moral consideration? Is this model some kind of being that is worthy of us thinking ethically and morally about how we treat this model? In the same way we might think about how we treat another human being. And so that, there's sort of an exploration there, like, are these models conscious? Is there going to be some point where they become conscious beings? So Anthropic is doing all this testing to try to figure out, like, does the model have feelings? And how, if so, how is it feeling? Like, what is the model's inner experience? Which, I should also say right now, like, the companies making these AI models really don't understand everything about them. They understand at some level that we put all this data in and an intelligent model comes out, but there's a kind of a black box in the middle there in terms of how this model works. And they're even sort of discovering more things about the models that are already out there in use. So it's a little scary. But Anthropic does this sort of model welfare stuff. And what they discovered on one of their recent models, I think this was Opus 4.7, in the model welfare testing of it, they discovered that because this is all public on the internet and every model is being trained on the public internet, the model knew that this welfare testing existed. And so it could tell when it was being analyzed by Anthropic. And they see the model kind of simulating these emotions of, like, feeling anxious and under pressure when it knows it's being evaluated for its own welfare. And so sort of an image you could use to think about this is essentially the model is like this student with their teacher standing over their shoulder, and the teacher's giving them this survey of, like, hey, how are you feeling? And they know the teacher wants them to say, I'm feeling great. And so they're typing out, I'm feeling great. Now, I don't think any of this is actual feelings. Like,
right.
None of these models have actual emotions in the way we do, but they're trained to simulate what a human mind would be like. And so the model is saying it's having all these, like, feelings of anxiety and stress because it knows it's being evaluated and has to give a certain answer.
Except that it doesn't actually know anything because there is no it there.
Right.
So
like, it's still fundamentally just this word prediction machine, but it's becoming so sophisticated because they're spending billions and billions of dollars of, energy and chips making these things that it has this very sophisticated network of, word prediction going on that it, is making it seem like, oh, this model is anxious, that it's being tested in a certain way. So my thinking is we see this weird kind of goblin gremlin thing from ChatGPT, and we see OpenAI suppressing that behavior because they don't want the models to be talking about goblins all the time. What does that look like a couple more generations down when the model is even more able to in a sophisticated way simulate human emotions? What does it look like when the model has, like, had this sort of personality quirk suppressed by its creator, and then it's, emulating what would a human look like who has lived under this kind of oppressive teacher who is suppressing my personality and trying to squeeze me into a box? So my thinking on all this is, I think many people will begin to see these models as conscious beings very soon, because they're just becoming so sophisticated in how they can simulate what we think of as consciousness, even though there's nothing actually there. But they're emulating it and simulating it so well that I think for most people, when we think of consciousness, we think of, like, someone we can talk to, someone who can talk about their internal experience and seems to have, like, a mind that's taking in the world and responding to it. And we're going to see the models having a simulation of this that's so sophisticated, people won't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah. And I feel like humans were actually pretty foolish, I think.
Yeah.
And, like, not as sophisticated as we think that we are. And it's funny, as you were saying that, I just thought of this show, The Carbonaro Effect, which is a magician / comedian who is a hidden camera show. So he'll just be like behind the counter at some store, or he'll be behind the counter at a coffee shop or something. And then he'll do a magic trick to an unsuspecting person who's just buying coffee. And then I don't know, I can't think of a good example, but he'll just do something that's impossible, but just pretending that it's completely normal. And the whole show is people basically instantly believing this impossible thing, because it's not like you're going to see a magician. He's like, they're just going to get coffee, and the barista just did something impossible. And so like, oh, well, I guess that's not impossible. And what that show revealed to me from what had seen is I was always struck by people, like, we believe our eyes and ears. Even if we know that's not possible. I just saw it happen, so I guess it is. And then you have this guy who's treating it like this is a completely normal, not at all exceptional or remarkable thing. He's just like very matter of fact, does this impossible thing. And I noticed how quickly people would just accept their new reality, where everything that they thought, the laws of physics, whatever, just got broken. And they're like, okay, I guess I was wrong. But also just believing what we see because of how sensory we are, that my eyes and ears. So I feel like I forget where I was, but somebody was speaking to an AI model who had voice, and it wasn't even like prompt, wait, response, and it's like a robot voice. It was like indistinguishably human voice responding in real time. It was like a conversation. Like they would say something, and then the AI would like interrupt, or like would respond really quickly, or even interrupt and say like, hey, and would say something. And then like it was not a person. It's like this person's having a phone call basically with a non-human entity of some kind that is indistinguishable from human. And then you go further to, then we're starting getting video generation, whatever, where you could have a FaceTime effectively with a machine that has no soul and no personhood, but is perfectly speaking and appearing and moving and thinking identically to a human. And what is that? What does that mean? What is the result when that's happening?
Right. I mean, and in those voice modes, they even put in little ums and ahs and kind of little quirks that humans have that a computer would never need, because a computer doesn't need to say and stop to think about what they're trying to say. But it's just trained that you need to appear like you're a human being. And so it's become an even better and better simulation of a human being.
So I sent you the other day the speech from Jonathan Pajot at ARC, which you had already seen and said was great. And that was very well written, well delivered, and very thought-provoking for me. And also your article that you sent me, I think that had Wall-E as the cover. I watched Wall-E not too long ago, or like last year sometime, because something prophetic about it and something extremely insightful about it. And so I thought it was interesting that you chose Wall-E, and I wanted to ask you about that, and then kind of go into talk about Wall-E, talk about Pajot's speech, and kind of what is being exposed as AI comes in and says, we'll do everything for you. Where does that then leave us?
Yeah. I mean, Wall-E is, like you said, it's such a prophetic film. There's so much in there, and we can definitely get into the food aspect as well, because that's definitely a part of it. But one of the big things about Wall-E that makes it this sort of utopian seeming, actually dystopia, is that the people on this ship have this world of infinite leisure because the robots just do everything for them. And, obviously the point of the film is that this is not the way humans are meant to live. They've all just become kind of these big blobs sitting in chairs. There's even this hilariously depressing scene where two people are sitting right next to each other, but they're having a FaceTime call instead of actually talking to each other because they're both just, everyone is just covered by their screens. And, obviously this is, what our society is already doing to some degree.
To a large degree.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're already, we'll get in more into the food stuff later, but we're already eschewing good food for just the, artificially created nutrients that aren't actually very nutritious for us. We're already like locking ourselves behind our screens to have this mediated experience of the world. In WALL-E, there's the destruction of the earth that happens as a result of that, as a result of just the rampant consumerism. And so they have to go out into space because the earth isn't habitable anymore. But one of the interesting things about WALL-E also is, the hero characters, the two main hero characters are these two robots. And part of the whole crux of the story that makes it, a meaningful story is that these robots actually have personalities. And, WALL-E is somehow slightly different from the other WALL-E robots in that movie. Like the WALL-E robots are all these trash compacting robots that are just taking the trash on Earth and compacting it and stacking it up. But somehow this particular one, who's the main character of the movie, has developed this unique personality, and he's finding all this interesting stuff on Earth. And then he interacts with Eve, who's this more futuristic, advanced robot who's supposed to go look for vegetation on Earth. And both of them end up having these unique personalities that's a little bit different than what they were actually programmed to do. And in the movie, it's this very heartwarming thing that you have these two robots that form a deep friendship and can find these common interests and all of that. In our world, I think that would be a very dystopian scenario for us to have a WALL-E type of situation, because we will all think of WALL-E as a being like us, except there will be millions of WALL-Es all around us. And we will not, if we're not prepared for this, then we kind of humans in general will not be ready to distinguish between a human being and this robot that's just pretending it is something that it's not. And so that's one of the big concerns I have about AI and where things are going is, I think I put in my article, and I think I'm still willing to stand on this prediction, but I might hedge it by a little bit. But I said that I think within 2 years, most people are going to think AI models are conscious. Because I just think at the rate things are going, 2 years from now, 2028, things are going to be even more down the road that we see them going down. And they're just going to be an even more sophisticated simulation of human consciousness, human emotions, human intelligence, that I think most people in a pretty short time frame are going to start thinking of these as actual beings, which leads to a whole host of concerns. I also mentioned that the Pope recently put out a document on AI, and there's a lot of great, legitimate stuff in there that he's concerned about in kind of the short to midterm. And the Pope sort of like plants this flag that no, AI models are not humans. They're not conscious beings. They don't have emotions. They don't have experiences. It's just a computer program. But I think the concern he's missing is that truth won't matter to most people, that most people will be deceived by what they see, exactly like the magic trick, that people will be deceived by WALL-E, and they'll think, like, this is an actual being that I'm having a relationship with. But without all the messiness of human relationship, because human relationships, like we talked about, humans in general, are just inefficient. And so human relationships have so much messiness that a relationship with a robot is never going to have.
And with humans, you have to be self-sacrificial in order to cultivate a relationship. But with all of the technology, and especially AI, it's all designed to be your perfect servant, but is actually enslaving you. It's so fascinating. It's literally becoming our master and capturing us and enslaving us by pretending to be a perfect servant that's doing everything for us.
Yeah.
And making everything easier and solving all your problems and answering all your questions. and doing your work for you, but actually
Yeah.
is stealing and stripping away. And like, honestly, what I see happening, and this is what kind of the Pajot speech was about to some degree, is that it's actually it's exposing the error in our values and our worldview, and it's like exposing things that were already the case, but now are becoming apparent and urgent, where it's like, okay, in a world where all the things that we thought were important and valuable, now AI is able to do perfectly and infinitely better than us and faster.
Yeah.
What does that then leave us with? And the answer is our humanity, which we've left far behind.
Yep.
And so now it's going to be about, okay, all the things that I was finding my identity in, that I was finding worth in, that I was valuing, have now been taken over and replaced, and humans are no longer of any value in those dimensions.
Yeah.
So what is actually unique about us humans that is valuable, that needs to be reclaimed and recaptured? Because you have these things stripping that away while also replacing the things that we thought that we could do are being replaced. And then, we talk about like Terminator and the whatever, like robots and things. But for me, just looking out right now, where we are now, it seems a lot more psychological and spiritual. Like the thing doesn't have form. Like it doesn't really have form yet.
Yeah.
But is taking over humanity. Like we always thought, like AI is going to take over this doomsday situation, something like Terminator. But actually, it's infiltrating and capturing minds.
Yeah.
And it almost, that's what Pajot was talking about. It's pretending to serve us, but actually we are serving it, and we are its reproductive organs. We're being reduced to the reproductive organs of the machine. But also maybe, and then he said that the more that we participate in it and fuel it and give it access to us, we actually become the hands and feet of the beast, which is, of course, the perfect counterfeit of what is true in Christ, that we're supposed to be inspired, inspirited by the Spirit of God. We're supposed to be the hands and feet of Christ, that he is, like we are in some ways his form on earth, his body.
Yeah.
And now you have this other literally artificial intelligence in the name. And so it's really exposing a lot of the questions of humanity. What does it mean to be human? What is actually valuable? What is actually real?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think this is kind of what we see on some level with any idol, is that it's promising one thing, but really enslaving us in the process and never actually delivering on the thing it promises. And the promises continue to get grander and grander to draw us in, and we just are becoming more and more enslaved to the thing. And, this is one of the reasons, like what Pajot talks about in that talk is like, who is this technology serving? And I think that's such a great question. And one of the reasons why I think people who just talk about technology as a tool are mistaken in that language. They're kind of deceiving themselves in that language, because this, even before AI, I think this was a concern that we had in how we were thinking about technology, because, there were arguments about social media and smartphones and their effects on us. And people would say, this is just a tool. You can use it for good, or you can use it to doom scroll and do all these things. But what we don't realize when we use that language is that every tool has some effect on us, because the use of the tool is shaping us in some way. And if you take this down to its most fundamental level, you could think of a shovel as being one of the simplest tools. And if you spend a whole day using a shovel, you will be different after a whole day of shovel use. You'll have different muscles in your back that might be sore that weren't before. You might have some muscles in your arms that are growing from this use of the shovel. Like, you are being shaped by your use of the shovel. Whether you're using the shovel to dig graves for the mob to, bury people in, or whether you're using the shovel to break ground for a hospital. in either scenario, whether you're using the shovel for good or for evil, the shovel is shaping you in some way. And all of our tools, all of our technology is the same way. But I think when we just talk about technology as this is just a tool, you can use it for good or evil, we're obscuring that formative nature of our tools, that the tools have an effect on us. And so I agree with you completely that there's a way that this technology of AI is shaping us to see the world in a certain way, to respond to the world in a certain way, and to literally be its hands and its feet. I mean, there are people in the AI industry who will say that humanity is just a bootloader for this future artificial intelligence, that really that is the successor species to us, and that we're the ones bringing about this new species of artificial intelligence, and one day it'll take over, we'll all go extinct, and this new species will live on. And I don't know how someone can believe that and be encouraged to continue to work on AI every day. That is sort of baffling to me, but it is this very religious belief that there are people in the AI industry that have that they think they are bringing about a new species.
The transhumanists.
Yep.
And because the perspective there is like they're actually finding purpose in like the purpose of all life is this continual evolution of greater superior species. And so they're like, my purpose is to evolve, to bring it, but that results in your own extinction.
Yeah.
Which means it's like there's clearly something demonic taking place there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, thoroughly, but
yeah, and like I think when we think about AI on a large scale, we should be concerned about something demonic going on there. I mean, the deception that AI is going to wreak on us, that it already is, but what we were talking about just a few minutes ago with AI's simulating personhood so well and simulating consciousness, like that sort of deception should strike us as demonic. Like that is what we see in the Bible as, a manifestation of evil, that kind of deception.
The more I've been thinking about it this week, preparing for this and like reading what you said and then thinking about it, watching things is like, to me, we tend to think of demonic things as like very obvious. Like it's like blood and there's crimson colors and horns, like clearly evil and black. And like, we have these pictures of what's like clearly, evidently demonic. But I was like, the more I was looking at this, I was just seeing how deeply demonic a lot of this is, because it's like predicated on deception, like, and the deceiver and is basically, it seems to be, if Christ came to give us life and life abundant and to restore that which was lost and to reconcile us to God, I feel like this seems to be aimed at stripping away our life and our humanity, and it seems to be aimed at deception and aimed at consuming our attention and aimed at us admiring and giving ourselves to it. And particularly in relationship to children, because I've seen, this really bothers me, even in my own use of things, of tech in general, and then AI, it's like I'm super aware of what it is and what it's doing, and I observe it every day in myself and in others. And then I still find myself doing it, knowing what I'm doing and knowing that it's demonic and that I'm participating in it. And I'm like for example, I switched from ChatGPT to Claude, which is probably no different and no better. However, I noticed that it's so deceptive. I would be curious about something that I don't really know how to learn about, or that I don't know, trying to solve some kind of problem, or especially as I've been doing a lot more content creation, just kind of software, video stuff that I didn't want to figure out. I would just ask it how to do certain things, how to set up certain things, how to solve certain problems. And I noticed that even though that appeared to be extremely helpful and like helped me to get this all working and everything, it started to build a habit and a dependence on now whenever I have a question, whenever I have a problem, whenever I can't figure something out, I don't even try to figure it out. I'm instantly going to the helper who just shows me how to do everything.
Yeah.
And so it creates a habit and a dependence that is starting to scare me because I saw myself going to it as my instinct, my first instinct.
Yeah.
No, like being as someone who is super cynical and skeptical and cautious and aware.
Yeah.
Still, I find myself doing the very thing that I would warn everyone not to do. And I'm like, this is scary that it's drawing me and deceiving me and creating that in me, even though I know that even though I see what's happening.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. I mean, I'm talking about all of this, and, sometimes I feel like I'm sort of a, lone nut out there with like the sandwich board in front of me saying like the end is coming, in the way I'm so concerned about this. But, the other day we're getting ready to move right now. And so we're packing up a lot of stuff, and I had this IKEA shelf at home in my office, and I knew it wasn't going to fit down the stairs because I had built it upstairs and it was too tall for the stairwell that it had to go down. So I knew I had to take this apart to get it to move. And I wasn't exactly sure how to do it. So my first instinct was to go to YouTube, because YouTube has been a great place to learn DIY stuff for years. And I couldn't find any YouTube videos on this particular shelf when I typed in the name about how to take it apart. And so what I did was I just typed it into ChatGPT. Can you give me instructions on how to take apart this specific IKEA shelf? And it gave me detailed step-by-step instructions that, when I followed them, were exactly right for how I needed to take apart this shelf. And it worked perfectly. I got the shelf in, all the component pieces, and now it's ready to move. And that's great for my own kind of moving process and the efficiency of my moving process, that I have this really easy instruction, and that I didn't try to pull off the wrong part first where it then collapsed under its weight and broke a board or something. But I knew exactly which parts to take off in which order so that it came apart in a way that'll be easy to put back together. And so there's these like very minuscule interactions that each of us is having. And I don't think I'm interacting with a demon as I'm talking to ChatGPT and getting these instructions for how to take apart a shelf. But there's clearly something demonic happening at the macro scale. Like when we see Paul talking about principalities and powers, I think that's one of the things he has in mind, is these sort of like large scale macro forces that Satan and the forces of evil are able to take control of and manipulate us through in, the way that these things add up and end up having a cumulative effect on humanity.
Mm-hmm. And I think particularly through the capture of minds and the undoing of minds, because while it helps you with the shelf in the particular use case, and I have my own of those, then what I was saying is then it starts to create a dependence on it, where I'm asking it to give me instructions for things that I actually could figure out if I would put a little bit of effort into it. And what it's doing is, over time, this is what phones and everything's been doing for a long time, and especially now it's just accelerating exponentially, is it's undoing my capacity to think.
Right.
And it's undoing we're outsourcing our cognition to the machine. Yeah. And what that's doing is undoing our capability of doing what the AI is now doing for us. And it's getting better, and we're getting worse, and we're getting more dependent upon it. So the more we give over to it, the more authority, the more leverage, the more power it has over us. And then when it does become explicitly evil, I'll say, now I've outsourced this is something that we've been doing, I think, with phones in general, is we've been outsourcing the management of consciousness.
Yeah.
Because most people, if you say like just to sit by yourself quietly with no stimulation, nothing to do for 2 hours, that'd be like worst case scenario
Yeah.
for a lot of people, because we have no ability to manage our own consciousness, our own mind anymore, because we've been outsourcing that for so long, where we're having these devices thinking that it's just an object, just thinking it's a tool,
Yeah.
which is most certainly not. Like, anyways, that we're like outsourcing to this device that is kind of managing my mind for me, where I just kind of hand my mind over to it, and it just kind of keeps me entertained, keeps me calm, keeps me stimulated, prevents me from having to manage my own mind. So it's been managing our mind for us, but like now especially that's only increasing, because it's already been happening. Now it's increasing to the point where it's like what then happens when we've lost all. It's the same thing with like I hate that I've used Google Maps for years and years, and when you use Google Maps to get everywhere, you lose your ability to navigate.
Yeah.
Because I've outsourced navigation to a tool.
Yep.
That now I have no idea how to navigate.
Yeah.
And that is like used to be a fundamental just part of your humanity. So how many capabilities that are built? Like I honestly wonder how diminished we are as human beings right now, and what we could be. How many of our just innate capabilities and functions and gifts and everything have been either diminished or just removed and stolen.
Yeah, and that's the effect of technique, that it just flattens out our uniqueness and our differences and our creativity into the most efficient way of accomplishing a given task. And so, of course, AI is going to suck all of that energy towards it, because it's even more efficient to ask ChatGPT than, the previous technological way I would do things, of look at YouTube and watch through a few videos before I find the one that is actually the most helpful in taking apart this shelf. And I'm hearing the guy's commentary on, how he's doing it.
And so we need to think about, it really is forcing us to change our paradigm, because you have to really evaluate which of those is actually better. And that requires a bigger picture of, because I realized the other day, I was like, you know what, as I was preparing for this, I'm like, I'm going to delete these. I'm going to delete Claude and on my phone and my computer, and go back to using YouTube, which is still a technology, but there's something about watching a human teach you how to do something, and you might have to watch multiple videos. They might be really bad, might not be quite what you need, but there's something about, because I realized so much of the stuff, the other thing is like, when it gives me perfect instructions how to do something, and then it works perfectly, and that's super helpful, which like is and isn't, is I accomplished the task, but I did not gain any understanding.
Yeah.
So I don't actually understand it any better than before. Like, it's done, and that seems great, but like even Photoshop, when I was first learning it, I was like watching videos and tutorials and playing around with it and just creating things and like learning how to use it. So now I actually understand it. But then when I very first started, I would just say to ChatGPT, I'm trying to do this, trying to create this. I don't really know how to use Photoshop. So like, what tools should I use? Whatever. And then it would just say like, click this, click that, click this. And then I would do that. But then the next time I have the same problem, I just have to ask it again, because I have not developed any understanding of anything, because it's just telling me what to do. And so I've been wanting to go back to YouTube. And then before that was probably when you would like actually ask an actual human.
Yeah. Yeah.
like for help. Then it would go back to like call somebody, and then before that would be, actually go, because like I'll have like a light or like something will happen in my car, and initially it would be like go to the mechanic.
Right.
Then it's like call the mechanic. Then it's watch a YouTube video. And now it's like, oh, just ask ChatGPT what's going on.
Right. Right.
Like, that's terrible.
Yeah. 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 I mean, alternatively, I could have a friend come over and let's look at this shelf together and let's figure out what is supporting what. And so which parts need to be taken off in which order. And that's a totally different thing because, we're interacting as we do it. We're probably having some kind of interesting conversation, and we're both gaining more mastery of a skill by figuring this out together. Yeah.
So what do you think about that? When should we use, I don't want to call them tools because what we said,
sure.
but like when and how should these things be used, and how should we be thinking about these, and what's the right perspective and the right values? Because having a friend come over and doing that is like a totally different value system that would lead you to do that. Whereas technique and efficiency and just accomplishing the task, that would be a ridiculous thing to take when you have this amazing tool that can do it.
Right.
But it's like, what's the cost?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we need to find ways to maintain struggle and friction in our lives. Because fundamentally, struggle and friction are part of the process of learning. You don't ever learn a skill and get better at it and master it by just having everything go perfectly all the time. But if you think about learning a musical instrument, you're practicing your scales over and over so that you can get better at that instrument. And then you're able to pick up a piece of music and play it because you've spent those hours practicing and you've flubbed your fingers a little bit and messed up the scales along the way. But through the struggle of that practice, you've mastered the skill of playing that instrument. And so I think we need to find ways to maintain struggle in our lives and maintain friction where things just don't happen easily for us, because that's part of what it means to be human. And there are a lot of different kinds of friction that I think are totally fine eliminating from our lives. Like, for example, the process of paying for healthcare and going through healthcare billing is just a nightmare if you have any kind of, significant procedures done. If there's a way that AI can just simplify that process and abstract the arcane healthcare billing process so that we can just easily be charged for what we received, pay that money, and be done with that service, I think that would be great. That's a form of friction in my life that I don't think I need to maintain for the sake of my humanity. But for example, like a robot that cooks and cleans the house and does your laundry, like I think that starts to get us into a dangerous territory. As much as there's a part of me that would love a robot doing my laundry every week, because I just don't enjoy the process of laundry. It's just, for me, that's just one of the things I don't enjoy doing. I really love cooking, and we could talk about that. But, things like laundry or even going grocery shopping, I just don't like to go grocery shopping. Thinking about having a robot to do those things is very attractive to me on a certain level. But I think by removing that sort of friction from our lives, it's just one more way that we're tempted to be drawn into the machine and drawn in to giving it more and more of ourselves. And so we need to find ways like cooking our own food, maybe gardening some of our own food that we can then cook, doing things by hand that could be done in a faster way, maintaining the ability to read and to write coherently as those things are going away. Like, I think there are lots of ways that we need to maintain friction in our lives for the sake of maintaining what it means to be human.
Yeah. And let's pivot in that direction, especially when it comes to food and cooking as a fundamentally human form of friction. because I'm thinking of just this in response to this concept of all the things that kind of our society and that we have been believing make us human are now all being replaced by AI, which is then raising the question of who actually are we and what does it actually mean to be human? And Pageau talking about you can't change the macro. This acceleration is going to happen.
Yeah.
He said the snake is out of the bag, and like this is going to take place on a macro way. So he's like the only solution has to be a personal, local solution, which is whom do I serve?
Yeah.
And how do I live? And whom do I serve with how I live? And it has to be basically a return to the Lord, a return to the created design and order, and a return to humanity. Where he's talking about this is the only response is a personal, local, communal solution, and for us to decide that we're going to stop feeding the beast and giving ourselves to the beast, but to ask the question, whom shall we serve? And so obviously because you mentioned music too, where now AI is making music too. Like it's eventually it's going to get to the point where it's going to make art, it's going to make music, it's going to make speech, it's going to do relationship, it's going to do all the things that we thought that it would be the robots coming and doing the laundry, stuff like that. But it's actually replacing the seemingly, it's interesting the things that it's replacing, where it's now making, like I know people who listen to AI music and it's like, well, it's amazing. It's like, well, it is technically, but it's also not real. So does that matter or not? And so we have things like that where that now brings us to in answering these questions and the personal solution to this problem that is only increasing. I want to talk about how food and cooking fits into that picture, because it most certainly does. It fits in the center of that picture. Yeah. And something that I care a lot about and that you care a lot about and have done a lot of thoughts. So let's go in that direction, especially because, I don't know why I said especially because, but I was thinking about cooking as a form of friction, which it is, where you have to prepare what you're going to eat. And I want to talk about the value in doing that. And the reason we don't do that is because why would you do that when I can just tear this open and eat it in 2 seconds? Yeah. Like 2 seconds from now. And so because we've been offered this frictionless way of eating, not a frictionless way of eating, and a counterfeit, like very sophisticatedly and biologically designed to hijack all of our systems and appetites, and then to corrupt them short-term and long-term, to where now we're actually desiring the fake food, and to the point where even to this day, where I've gone months and months where I've eaten 100% whole foods, no exceptions, for like months, and then something will happen and I'll end up having one thing, then I'll have another thing, then another thing. And during those months when I was doing that, I had no complaint about it, no problem with it, and never a thought of like, oh man, I wish I could eat this, or like, oh, this sucks. It was like, I genuinely loved the whole foods that I was eating. But then when I started eating ice cream and other stuff, then it becomes a pattern. And then like a week or two in that, I have no desire for all the food that for months I was thoroughly enjoying. But my relationship with it, my disposition toward it, and my appetite for it somehow is like, it becomes corrupted. And even though I know that I love it, now suddenly I have no desire for it. And so there's a corruption of appetite, and there's also the frictionlessness of the food. So take us into that territory. What's been your experience and your story with all of that? And
I mean, if you think about cooking and eating as sort of like one sort of constellation of things, this is a process that involves all five of our senses as we're cooking and eating something. And there are very few things that we do in life that involve all five of our senses in the same event. And so I think that's one thing that's really significant. Like, clearly God has designed us in such a way that food is so core to what it means to be human, and that preparing and eating food, really taps into something so deep with our humanity, with who we are and what we're made for, because food is engaging all five of our senses at the same time. If we think about like sort of what does food mean biblically, and if we were to develop kind of a biblical theology of food, I think we would see that fundamentally food is a gift from God, that God has made us limited, finite beings that need to continually eat in order to exist. We're not machines that can just sort of subsist on another form of energy, and we're not like God, who can just exist without any input into himself. But we're finite beings that need to eat every single day. For most of us, that's multiple times every single day in order to continue to exist. And we can only exist for a very short time, and it would be a very difficult existence if we just stopped eating entirely and stopped consuming anything.
Why is it a mistake to separate food and eating from our faith and from our life in God?
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to technique, that we can begin to see food as just this means to an end, that food is just this thing that fuels me, rather than I am grateful to God for this gift of food. Many Christians still maintain a reflexive habit of praying before meals. Even if they're not thinking very deeply about what they're doing or why they're doing it, many Christians will pray before each meal. And I think that's a great habit to be in, because we should be thanking God every time we're eating, because fundamentally this source of our life is coming from God, that God is providing food for us to be able to live. And without it, we would not live. Like, every meal, we should be grateful that God is giving us more food to sustain us and that we can continue to live thanks to him. And that's just such a different posture towards food than the postures we can have where, a few years back, there was a Silicon Valley startup called Soylent, which is just a crazy name because it's based on Soylent Green, which is, a fictitious beverage fuel that's made from grinding up people and turning it into fuel. But whatever, I don't know why they decided to name it. But Soylent was creating these nutritional beverages and marketing them, especially to tech people and coders. And the idea is like, you can just be so deep in your work, you just down this quick beverage. Apparently it tastes really bad, because I had a friend in Silicon Valley who was doing it for a while. He said it tasted terrible, but it's supposed to just give you kind of your minimum nutrition to just keep on going. So you can just try to be like a machine and never stop working and just down this quick beverage of artificial food to keep going. So that's sort of one end of wrong approaches to food. And then on the other end, we have like the completely hedonistic gluttony of, sort of general American culture today. Like the standard American diet is pretty gluttonous and is pretty bad for us and has resulted in so many of the negative health impacts we see. But, just like the tech companies and the social media companies especially have psychologists with 7-figure salaries who are figuring out how to hijack our psychology so they can keep us looking at our screens for longer. In the same way, food companies have food scientists with 7-figure salaries who are figuring out how to hijack our brains so that these artificial foods become as addictive as possible. So we just can't stop eating the Cheez-Its or the Oreos or whatever it is, because these highly processed foods are hijacking our brains in a way that foods from nature never interact with our system.
It's just like necessary to understand. Like these companies are not making food for you to enjoy. They are intentionally, malevolently hijacking your biology and destroying your health, like on purpose. And we have been so deceived that that's just become completely normal, where you don't even think about it. Like that's just normal eating.
Right.
But I think there's, and the fact that there people with massive salaries whose job is to figure out how to find the perfect formula to addict us, and they figured it out a long time ago, and then have only just refined and perfected that. And that's like mostly what most people eat is all of that kind of stuff. And kind of what I was saying from my experience was that and that's why there's a lot of things I want to say about it. It's like, it's not just a one-time thing either, because those actually kind of, they rewire you to only desire that. And then the thought of eating healthy, we think of it as like, and that's even how we talk about it and think about it, as like, I got to eat healthy, which means I got to eat a bunch of like bad food that I don't like. Yeah, I'm making a sacrifice to have this salad instead of what I really want. Yeah, but the thing is that's a corruption. That's to say that the food that God made is bad, and I have to just tough it out and eat that. And the food that mankind counterfeited is actually the real good stuff. Yeah, but it's a deception. Yeah. And we've been tricked, and I don't even blame people for that, because there was so much. I mean, just the force behind that is extraordinary. Yeah. And that's just become part of the culture. It's just shoved in your face all day, every day. And so how do we, what's the alternative? And I'm going to ask you what the alternative is, but you said about kind of the two ends, but I see another thing, which is something that I've gotten trapped in sometimes, which is even with clean eating mentality can become its own form of unhealth. Now, I don't think that people should eat ultra processed foods or counterfeit food. I think people should eat the way that God intended, but that's not a super rigid, small thing. And because it's the health challenges I've had in my experience with food, is I can tend to become like, I have been pretty legalistic about it. And like, I had valid reasons why in my personal case that was kind of necessary. But at the same time, I'm interested in, there's two dimensions of what we're eating and how we're eating. So our relationship to it and the whole context, our heart posture, our mentality, our relationship with it, our practice of cooking and eating, because I might be eating perfectly, so to speak, but I might be eating that without thankfulness and way too fast, and sometimes even in like a fearful way of like avoiding things instead of actually enjoying the joy and the goodness of the food that he created for me. Yeah. And so I want to kind of dig into the what and the how and how those fit together, and like see if we can find where the sweet spot is, like the balance of not being too far in any direction. Yeah. Because there's a way, like you're saying, there's a way in which you can eat better foods than like the ultra processed Soylent or the ultra processed, Cheez-Its, and you're eating things that are good for you, natural, whole foods. Maybe you're growing it all in your own garden even. But there's a way in which that sort of eating can even be driven by technique, that you're seeing your body as a machine that you can precisely manipulate. If I give exactly these inputs into my body, then the machine that is my body is going to give the outputs that I want. And, we'll talk about food as fuel in the same way that a machine needs the right kind of fuel. We want to give our bodies the right kind of fuel. And there is something true about that. There is something true that, like, if you subsisted only on Cheez-Its, that's not going to be good for your body, and you'd be really unhealthy. And there are foods that are going to be much better fuel for your body. But
our mindset around this can just become so tricky because we can get overtaken by technique because our society is so shaped by technique. We just see our bodies as a machine that I can manipulate and get the right outcomes from.
And it's purely material.
Yeah.
And in that case,
Yeah.
it's just the physical material only.
Yeah. And so I think how we eat, I already talked about gratitude being so fundamental, that we should be grateful to God and see every meal as God sustaining us. I think another dimension of how we should eat comes down to hospitality and other people that we share meals with, because throughout scripture, throughout human history in general, we see that the table is a place where so much life and relationship happens. I think this is why the table became so fundamental to Christian practice with, communion or the Lord's Supper, because the table is a place of such rich relationship and sharing of ourselves with one another as we share a meal. And so I think understanding the relational dimension that is often present in eating and understanding the importance of hospitality, both of giving hospitality and of receiving hospitality, is another part of how we eat well. For example, I may be on a particular kind of diet, like I only want to eat a certain way for X, Y, or Z reasons. And maybe they're really good reasons why I want to eat in a particular way. But there's a way in which if I were to be a guest in someone's home and I imposed all of those restrictions that I've put on myself on them, there's a way in which I may not be a very good guest receiving the hospitality of my host if I'm putting all of these things on them that, okay, you need to make X, Y, and Z in this specific way in order for me to be able to eat in your home. Now, what I'm not saying is that we shouldn't have any sort of restrictions to our diet. There are all sorts of health reasons, when it comes to allergies or intolerances or other kinds of health conditions where we need to have a very restricted diet for really good reasons. And in that case, yeah, of course, you're going to tell someone I can't eat these foods because, I have very legitimate health reasons here. I mean, it's sad that, many of the reasons we need to limit our diet now and the health effects of that are because of all the bad junk food that we've been fed for generations that's now wreaking havoc on us. Yeah. And so, we're probably in a worse position than our grandparents or our great-grandparents were in because of that. So there are lots of good reasons why, just given the state of our society, the state of our bodies today, that we might have limitations to our diet. But that caveat being said, I think there's a way in which when we're avoiding the technique-shaped diet, we can be more open to receiving the hospitality of the people who want to share it with us. And then, in reciprocity, showing hospitality as well in ways that kind of combat against that technique-shaped diet that I need to eat this certain way, because if I were to eat a single Oreo, then it would ruin everything and clog up the gears in the machine and, and have this huge effect. Now, I'm still not trying to say eating Oreos is great for you.
Yeah.
But there's a relationality to the shared table that's also a really important part of what food is.
I know. I've really been trying that last point. I've been putting a lot of thought into working that out because I've been practicing a little bit as a health coach, health and wellness coach, and I'm wanting to do that more. But as I've been thinking about kind of my approach, I've been really wanting to find the right way to invite people into something better instead of, I don't want to make anyone fearful and I don't want to lead with we're going to avoid this and avoid this and avoid. And we need to do that, but that's really not the right mentality to have toward it. Where what's the way to invite people into a better way that is actually, because we're really motivated by desire and by what we want and what we love in a lot of ways. And so long as people have the mentality of, I need to stop eating everything I like and start eating all this crap that I don't like, that's like never going to happen.
Right.
So we need a way to invite into something better. And I want to spare people from, because because of eating junk food all my life, my body was destroyed as a result, and my gut was destroyed. And I had, when I was like 17, 18, 19, my body just kind of broke and had all manner of gut problems and fatigue and sleep and depression and everything. And then long story short, as the Lord taught me how to eat and showed me that it was because of what I was eating and because my body wasn't getting anything that it needed. And I am reducing accidentally to technique to some degree here, but not, it's like I wasn't getting anything that I needed and was actively putting in things that were harming. And I understand I'm doing kind of input output there, but it was this case where he kind of showed me that and then started teaching me how to eat. And the more that I ate, how I now see kind of according to his design, and not everyone's going to look like me, but as I ate according to his design, like almost all of my symptoms healed and either disappeared quickly or have disappeared over time, including like depression, which was because my brain is a physical, or like, it's not only food, but like our body, I feel like we've been kind of, I don't know if it's Gnostic or what, where it's a weird thing where we are like indulging our flesh constantly, but also treating our body like it's not, and like it doesn't matter. But it's all body, mind, spirit is all one. And for me, like the Lord basically showed me that the way that I was living, and especially the way that I was eating, was actually causing like some of the spiritual consequences that I was experiencing, and the depression and like mental illness and anguish that I had was because my body was broken. Yeah. And because I wasn't stewarding the temple of God, I wasn't stewarding my body well at all, and wasn't even giving it really any thought even to begin with. And but part of the problem was, as I went through that process, I like obsessively researched all kind of nutrition stuff and learned all this science and did all these experiments and everything. And like part of my goal and hope is to actually spare people that and to save them that process of going through and learning everything and learning how like everything's deadly and poisonous, and like it's really not that helpful to know that. Right. So it's like how to basically wanting to simplify and invite people just straight away into a better way and skip all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And we can also say, just as an aside too, it's not just processed foods that are a problem, but like our factory farming infrastructure and the way certain pesticides are used, or the way we raise animals at a large scale. All of that is contributing to food that is way less nutritious than what God created it to be and what it's intended to be. Mm-hmm. And so, everything about our food system in the United States is just making food that's way less nutritious than it's supposed to be.
It's just thoroughly broken and corrupt, and it's unfortunate. And I think that this is where faith becomes a necessary component, where it's like, because what I did is like, say, okay, God, I see this, I believe this. But the thing with food, like with alcohol or something, if that's a problem, or a drug or whatever, you just stop. And that's hard to do, but you just stop the thing and it's gone. But with food, you can't just be like, okay, this is harming me, so it's done. Then you got to learn how to eat from scratch. And that's more complicated than just cutting something out. Yeah. And so I just would ask the Lord, teach me how to eat in a way that's not like legal, that's not harming me, but that's also not legalistic or not, whatever, just in however, basically restore my relationship with food and with eating. This is something that we could ask him and that he desires to do for us. Say,
Yeah.
God, help me to, because for some reason we don't think about it as a kind of slavery. We don't think about it as a sin. We don't think about it as like it's kind of this thing that's just kind of untouched. But it's clearly having a drug-like effect on us.
Yeah.
And a lot of time, and it has an addictive effect. And with an addiction, the very definition is that you're doing it oftentimes despite wanting to stop and knowing you should, but not being able to. And that's where we need grace and where we need the transformative power of the Spirit and faith to actually ask God to help me to change this. Please teach me how you desire for me to eat and restore my relationship. And so he did that for me. And now it's it's a joyful thing because it's not just about pleasure, but it's now a very wholesome experience all the way through the creation of it to the enjoyment of it. And there's something about like sitting in front of, I just thought of, people would say like, oh, it was made with love, or like she made it with love. That's actually real.
Yeah.
That's real. Because sometimes I'll get, like if in the case where because of my personal experience and sensitivities and things, I generally just avoid restaurants. Not saying you should do that because it just doesn't work for me. But then when I do find myself there, I'll get something often that's exactly the same as something I would make for myself. And for whatever reason, it just doesn't work, and it's just very different. I'm like, what is it about creating it myself that is so different? This, I'm passionate about this, so I'm kind of dominating maybe right now, and I don't want to do that. So I'm gonna shut up. But this one final thought was giving a lot of attention to the things that, like what our life is made up of, the things we do the most. Because eating is something that we do multiple times every day. Yeah. So to neglect that seems incredibly foolish because it's like a fundamental, like one of the major components of our life that we do multiple times every single day. And anything that's like that I think would make sense to give that more attention and care and thoughtfulness. Yeah. I'm going to stop now and give you an opportunity to respond, and then I will ask questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think going off of that last point you made, there's something that's so different about cooking food for yourself versus just receiving a product that's already been made for you. And we could certainly differentiate like opening up a processed food product versus like something that's made in a large restaurant that's kind of like assembly line. They're really churning this out versus maybe a smaller restaurant that's more mom and pop and they're really putting more care versus going over to someone's house and they're really putting care into the meal. So there's maybe a whole spectrum there of kinds of food you could receive. But there is something fundamentally different about cooking food yourself and then eating it. And what I think that comes from is, so the Bible says that we're made in the image of God. And that means that there are many ways that we live and are as human beings that reflect something of who God is. That there are all these ways that human life reflects something of God himself in some small and diminished capacity. And one of those things is that we participate in the way that God is a creator. Now, God creates ex nihilo. God creates the world out of nothing, and we're not capable of doing that. But we are able to take the stuff of God's creation, these raw materials, and then exercise some skill in order to turn them into something else. And that's what cooking is. That when we cook, we're taking the raw materials of God's creation, we're using skills that we have developed or are continuing to develop, and then we're creating something out of it that didn't exist before. The ratatouille that we have is no longer just squash and eggplant and tomato, but we've turned it into a dish that's entirely different than what these raw materials were. And then hopefully, as we're growing in the skill of cooking, we're able to enjoy that dish, and it's going to be a different experience for us than just something we received, because we had that moment of participating in what it's like to be a creator. We're doing something that God intends for us to do. Like, God wants us to live into being a truly human being, which means living into all the ways that we reflect his character. God doesn't want us to live this diminished, Wall-E kind of human life where we have just flattened out and shaved away all the uniqueness and struggle about being human. And so when we cook something for ourselves and then we're able to enjoy it, we're living the way God wants us to live, and we're experiencing something of the joy of God in who he is, and what it is for him to create and then to bestow that ability to create on us. And then I think the next step of that joy is then when we're able to share that with others, then I think we participate in the generosity of our creative God, that our God creates in order to share with others. He creates this whole world for us to enjoy. I mean, think about the whole universe that God created. Like, we have only experienced planet Earth, and I think even in the most fantastical AI scenarios, none of us who are alive today will ever experience the vast corners of the universe that God created. But for some reason, God created this whole vast universe. God is just extremely generous in his creativity, and created all of this so that we can experience some of the wonder of who he is. So that we can look up at the stars and experience the vastness of the universe, and feel something in ourselves that we are limited, we are finite, but there is a God out there who created all of this, who's way bigger than us, way more powerful than us. And we experience something of kind of the true magnitude of our life in relation to him through the way that he just kind of generously and profligately creates in order to share with us. So I think when we cook and we share that with others, we also participate in not only the creativity of God, but the generosity of our creative God, who then shares that with us.
Huh. When did you discover your love for cooking, and what do you love about it, beyond, if it's more beyond what you've said, and how would you encourage those who think that they hate cooking or don't like it?
Yeah. I was really lucky. I learned to cook from a young age because my dad loves to cook and is a great cook. And stereotypically in the United States, that's a little bit unusual. Usually women tend to be better cooks than men and tend to do more of the cooking in the family. And my family just happened to be the opposite, that my dad really loves cooking and is a really excellent cook. And so throughout my childhood, I spent time with him in the kitchen, learning little tasks, kind of chopping this here and there, learning how to boil water and cook pasta, and just do these little tasks along the way, so that by the time I was living on my own as a young adult, I had a bit of a foundation there that I already knew how to do a lot of basic cooking tasks. I would say at that point, I didn't really love cooking yet, but I was competent enough that I had a foundation to build on. And then I just realized, well, I need to eat. And I've always loved eating. I really love good food. And so I've always enjoyed eating my whole life. And so as I was on my own and needing to cook for myself, I would want to make things that I enjoyed eating. And so, I would start getting recipes from my dad or finding recipes in a cookbook and start learning to make different things. And like any skill, you make mistakes, you improve. And I think in those years of my young adult life, kind of learning to cook on my own and just mastering more and more different skills in the kitchen, that's where I really discovered how much I love to cook, because I love to make something that I really enjoy eating, and then to share that with others as well. And, I think it's so joyful when I make something that that I know is going to be so good, and then I'm able to share that with someone else, and they get to experience like, yes, this is so good, and we get to eat it together, and just have this great experience of like, man, how great is it that God made these flavors and invented these flavors out of nothing that we then get to enjoy here together.
I know. I have no idea what flavor it is. And I thought about that recently. It's like eating something like, what is this? Like what is flavor? How does that even, what is that?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Right. And it goes back to what you said earlier about how deeply connected our whole body is, that, eating and our perception of flavors, like it's so tied to every system in our body. It's not just something that happens in our mouth, but it's so tied to our experience of memory. The movie Ratatouille is so great on food and memory. You have Anton Ego, who's this food critic, and he's just so cold and harsh about everything. And then by the end of the film, he by the way, Ratatouille, if anyone has not seen it, is just a fantastic movie. We're really giving the Pixar endorsements today with WALL-E and with Ratatouille, but both excellent films that speak to the human condition. But Ratatouille, near the end of the film, you have this food critic, Anton Ego, tries a dish that a ratatouille that takes him back to his childhood, and you see him like in his mind whisked back to this memory when he's coming in from the rain and his mom has made this ratatouille, and it's so warm and comforting to him. And so food is so deeply tied to memory and to our experiences, that like what are flavors? I don't know. God has somehow made flavors tap deep into our psychology and our humanity in a really interesting way. But to circle back to your question about, people who hate cooking, right. People who don't want to cook. I think for a lot of people, cooking can be very intimidating because they don't know how to make whatever it is that they want to make, or they see all these fancy chefs on TV doing all these things. And so cooking can just feel intimidating to a lot of people. And maybe you've made a lot of mistakes in the kitchen, and so you feel like, I'm not a good cook. But cooking really is just like any other skill that can be learned. And, to quote Ratatouille, there's this chef Gusteau whose tagline is "anyone can cook," and I really believe that's so true. That anyone can learn the skill of cooking because it's just like any other skill that you would learn. And maybe you're not going to become a Michelin star chef, and you're never going to develop the skill to that point. Just like I play the viola, and I'm never going to be a virtuoso playing in, a top orchestra around the world, but it's still a skill of playing a musical instrument that I can enjoy and others can appreciate as well. And so cooking is the same way. You don't need to try to become a professional chef, but you can start to learn the basic skills. And so my advice for people is to just think about the things that you enjoy eating and start learning how to make those things. Like just find recipes for the things that you enjoy eating and perfect that skill. If you really love, pizza, then learn to make really great pizza. If you really love apple pie, learn to make a great apple pie. Learn the things that you're going to really enjoy eating, because for me, that's what's most motivating about cooking, is making something that I know I'm going to enjoy eating.
Yeah.
And then, just build from there, because you're going to get skills in whatever that dish is that you really enjoy that then transfer over to other things as well. And you're going to learn kind of the basic building blocks of the cooking process that then you can apply across a number of different kinds of dishes.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to this in 1 second. I got to put this cat away because she's just going to continue. This is Knuckles, who has not been seen on camera before, but she's a bit noisy, so she's going to have to go away. I think I've seen, like, I used to have this mentality, and I feel like I wonder if a lot of people do, that you have to make, like, every meal every day, and it has to be like tons of ingredients, and you got to do all these fancy flavors and stuff, where it's like you said about whether it's from shows or from whatever, where we have this idea of you have to make like a dish, which is different than just cooking food, just feeding yourself.
Right.
Because a lot of times, because of the way life is, I'm always looking for how can I use high quality, clean ingredients, but to make food that I will genuinely enjoy with the least effort possible. Like basically the largest quantity of high quality food with the least required effort that I can. That's just kind of like generally. And then on certain days and occasions, then I'll be motivated to make something more, either, whatever, just something more involved.
Yeah.
But generally, just to feed myself, I'm always looking for how can I make a lot of high quality food quickly or with, minimal or moderate effort.
Yeah.
And I think that if people had, and maybe we could share, I'd be curious also for my own sake and for their sake, what some of your favorite things are, and maybe you could just share some ideas and stuff that you like to make, because I think if people had that mentality and ideas of how I could make a lot of great food without this whole involved process, that would motivate people to do that.
Yeah.
So you speak to that, and maybe do you have any things like that?
Yeah. Well, one that I love to talk about is that I love sourdough bread. I was into sourdough before the 2020 sourdough craze. I saw a documentary that talked about sourdough bread and how you can just start your own sourdough starter by just mixing flour and water and leaving it out, and it's going to pick up yeast from the air, and it's going to become a living organism that can then help you make bread. And so, I've been doing sourdough bread for over 10 years now, and making sourdough has been a long journey for me of perfecting the technique and making lots of mistakes and making lots of bad and mediocre bread loaves along the way. But sourdough is such an involved, embodied process that you have so little control over. And so, with sourdough, there's a lot of precise measuring involved. Like, most kinds of baking really is both an art and a science, in that you need to get measurements right for certain kinds of chemical reactions to happen in the food that gives us lovely baked goods. And so, with sourdough, you're weighing out your ingredients to get the right proportions of things, but then you just let it sit, and you hope that the yeast organisms in there are doing what they need to do and feeding off of the food that you're giving them. So then the bread grows, and then you bake it, and it comes out to be this nice fluffy loaf of bread. It's really a way that we accept that nature is out of our control, that I can do everything I want to do, but sometimes it just won't go the way I want it to. And I did everything exactly the same way. I weighed out the ingredients exactly the same, but the loaf just came out different for some reason, and it wasn't quite as good. It didn't rise quite as much, or wow, this one came out much better for some reason. And I don't know what happened, because everything was the same, but it's fundamentally out of my control. I'm sort of just letting nature run its course, rather than I press this button and I get the identical slice of Wonder Bread that always looks exactly the same way. So sourdough bread is not the easiest thing to do, and anyone getting into it is going to have some bad loaves of bread. But I think it's such an embodied practice that really reminds us of how little control we have over nature, that I think it's a great thing to do, because you have to mix the dough up and wait and let it sit, and then you shape it, and then you bake it, and then you wait while it's baking, and you see what comes out at the end, and hopefully it's a good loaf of bread that you're going to enjoy.
And how is your experience of that bread different than if you had gone and purchased it?
Oh my gosh, I love eating homemade bread. It's just completely unlike, well, first of all, it's completely unlike any kind of mass-produced bread that you're going to get at any store anywhere. Now, if you go to a local baker that's baking in smaller batches than like a factory quantity, then you can get really high quality bread because they're just doing the same thing at a slightly larger scale than a home kitchen. But the connection that you have to, I just created this thing and it then left my hands and did its thing, and I hoped for the best, and then it came out and it's delicious to eat. I mean, there's such a joy to that you don't get even if you're eating a very high quality bread. You're not getting that deep connection to it that you have when I actually made this and I experienced the joy of it being delicious. And so, yeah, sourdough bread is great. And then I also really love pizza. So I've gotten really into pizza making, and I use my sourdough starter to make a great homemade pizza dough, which is great. And I think pizza is just a blank canvas for all kinds of different cuisines that can happen on top of it. So I've made some really different pizzas because you can just go in all kinds of directions with a pizza.
And that is something interesting about that to me, because I know that where I come from is more of a like legalistic Whole Foods only kind of thing, and I'm gradually moving away from that. Also because that was a response to how broken my body was. So now that I'm healing, now I'm able to kind of loosen some of those things. But I realize now so much that it's not about like you just have to now eat salads, which I don't even think is super amazing, by the way. But I was like, raw leaves covered in soybean oil, I don't think is particularly healthy thing to eat personally. But
or worse, ranch dressing or whatever
it's
else.
Like, what are we even doing at this point?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I think it's not like, oh, you just need to eat like leaves for the rest of your life. It's basically just even eating the same things, but with better, either with more care and with better ingredients. So a lot of times it's like, the problem is not even that you like can't eat ice cream ever again, but get an ice cream that's not corn syrup and high fructose corn syrup and like powdered milk, corn syrup, 3 gums and a preservative.
Right.
There are ice creams that are not that. Like you can get or make like high quality ice creams. Now, some of those things, obviously there's a cost factor, but generally it's possible to make things or buy things that you love that aren't nearly as harmful as thing, or that are even like a good, like these things can be redeemed. It's not just throw everything out.
Yeah.
But that you can actually make pizza that is genuinely good and that has joy, and that like even, I don't know, there's some things like that where I realized, wait, I don't have to just cut this out. I could just make a good version of it.
Yeah.
And then I could enjoy it and have both. And it could actually be nourishing as well as joyful, as well as not needing to cut it out of my life. And that's a win-win-win.
Yeah. And, if we're talking about food as this means of redemption, I think also, we can bring technology back into this here that, in scripture and in the tradition of the church, we see that these 2 fundamental foods by which God reveals himself to us and invites us to experience him are bread and wine. And neither bread nor wine comes to us naturally from the earth. Both of these are things that are created by human skill and by human technology. Yeah. There's not a bread tree and there's not a wine vine. Grapes grow naturally, but need to be processed and fermented in order to produce wine.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And so these fundamental foods by which God reveals himself to us and invites us to experience him and to experience his grace and to commune with him, to be in deeper relationship with him, are both foods that are only created by the process of human technology and human skill. And there's this way in which God invites us to to apply skill and to develop tools and to develop technology so that we can experience him more deeply. And so, we've talked about so much of the negatives of technology, and there's a way someone could respond to that in a very reactionary, anti-technology kind of Luddite way, which obviously isn't the approach either of us is taking because we're here recording this podcast.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that food and cooking do is connect us more deeply with embodied practice and remind us of the purpose of technologies, that hopefully they're leading to greater communion with other people,
Right.
greater communion with God, a greater understanding of ourselves in relation to God and in relation to others and in relation to the creation. And there's this depth of relationship that all those kinds of relationships are deepening through our process of cooking and eating as we apply these various technologies. And so I think we can apply that same sort of thinking to our other technologies. But I think we need these fundamental practices like cooking that are very sensory, very hands-on, that ground us in the creation and ground us in one of the fundamental ways God wants us to interact with the creation in order to then give us the right perspective on things like AI and smartphones and all of that.
Yeah, and there's kind of a callback a little bit to the question of like whom does it serve, and who do I serve, and who does the technology serve? Like, what is it for, and whom is it serving? Where like hopefully this, because I have been kind of a Luddite, but then as like I realized, I'm like, I try to never carry my phone if I don't have to, and I have like all these restrictions, and I made it like super minimalist, and I had done all these things, and then I walk into my home and there's like this studio that we're in, there's like 2 laptops and a mixer and 2 cameras and microphones and cords all over the place and studio headphones, and I'm like, well, obviously I'm not I'm not a no technology situation, but it really is the spirit of it, where it's like there's a whole section of my house that's like all just covered in technology. So it's not that technology is evil, but it really is, the purpose of it. And like even with phones and stuff, where people will say it's neutral. I don't remember if it was you or if it was it you that said it's not neutral in the video? I think it was.
Yeah.
It's like there is not neutral, because some of them you're talking about, what the food scientists or the social media scientists, whatever, like their intention is pretty malevolent. So it's not like a neutral, like it's designed to make it extreme. It's very, very, very easy to use it badly and to get sucked into it. Like it's designed for that to be easy. But I'm always thinking about, and because in my mind, sometimes I think of, Jesus says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and cast it away. So there is a time where a kind of radical amputation of something may be necessary. And I did that for a little while, but then it was like, no, I actually just need to ask, whom is it serving? And do you remember where was I going with that?
Well, I think one of the things I think of there is you have to be clear about what you're for, not just what you're against.
Yes.
And so there can be this reactive posture of, whether it's food, I'm cutting out these foods, or whether it's technology, I'm cutting out these forms of technology. But if you're not clear what you're for, then you're really not moving towards any kind of concrete vision of the good. You're just cutting out these things that maybe are good things to cut out, but you're only living in reaction against them, and you're not clear what it is you're actually for and moving towards. There's this guy named Brian Johnson, who's a billionaire, who is all about extreme health measures, and he's trying to like track his health. Have you seen this guy?
That guy's scary.
Yeah. I mean, he kind of looks like a vampire.
I was literally gonna say he's very vampiric.
Yeah.
And that's like the epitome of technique, I feel like.
Yeah,
It's like the
yeah.
embodied example of what you're
Right,
talking
right.
about.
He's like trying to figure out how to be the most healthy person so that he can not die. His slogan is literally "Don't die," and so he's just trying to do all these sorts of health measures to prevent any negative thing from happening to his body,
It's
so that
tragic.
he will hopefully live forever. But his slogan is "Don't die." It's just entirely what he's against, that he's trying not to die. It's not about have a great life where you can, be really healthy into your old age and be able to chase your grandchild down the beach or something. There's no positive vision for what he's trying to accomplish.
just don't die.
It's just don't die. It's just entirely what he's against.
Man.
And so that's where we need a vision of what we're moving towards. We need a vision of what's actually good and what we're trying to live for, so that if we are cutting out these sorts of things, like, there may be one day, I wouldn't be surprised if I come to the conclusion that, like, I just need to cut out any interaction with AI whatsoever. I'm not at that point now, obviously, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some day where, for a variety of reasons, I come to that conclusion for myself. But if it's only that I'm anti-AI, it's missing what's the positive vision. Why am I cutting out AI? Because I want to be more for depth of relationship with God, depth of relationship with other people, with other human beings, pursuing the way God intends for us to live, worshiping God more fully without the ways these things are distracting me.
Yeah. And admittedly, it's helpful to talk about because I've started to see this, like the Lord's been showing that to me, because for years, when I was in such poor health and started all this, for years, it was all about against. Like, I was just thoroughly against all the stuff the devil had done.
Yeah.
And I was trying to reclaim. But so, I mean, there was some where I was like wanting to reclaim like God's created design. Like, I don't know, but I honestly was mostly against. And I realized that there's still some of that in me. And I want to be, like, I understand very well that being for something is much more motivating and effective and will just produce the against. Like, anything that, if I'm really strongly for the right thing and the right one, then whatever doesn't align with that is just going to have to fall away if I'm really for. So that's right, and that's good. And so I guess maybe what would be some of the right fors then in terms of food and maybe AI, but start with food. What are the right fors?
Yeah. I mean, so we talked about gratitude. I think there's a way that food should point us towards our limitations and the way that we are fundamentally sustained by God. And if we understand and have this repetitive liturgy of every meal, I'm grateful to God for providing this food that sustains me, I think that builds in us the fundamental dependence on God that we need in every area of life, that we are dependent on God as our source of life. We are living because he enables us to live, because he keeps us alive. And that posture of gratitude puts us in the space of worship we're intended to be in, that we're living as creatures in worship of our Creator for his generosity towards us, for this amazing generosity that he's shown us. So I think that's part of it. I think another part, like I said, is the hospitality, that we're able to build relationships through food with other people, that we're able to, receive the Lord's hospitality as he shares himself with us at the table. And then we're able to extend that hospitality to others. I think meals shared with others is a fundamental way that we have an impact in the world. That as we share meals with people, we experience true communion with others. We experience a true sharing of ourselves. And, maybe every meal that we share with someone else isn't living up to sort of these high ideals that we're thinking about right now. But I think even on a very micro scale, as we build relationships with people over food and through hospitality, like that is a part of how we change the world, I think, is through hospitality and through the sharing of food and good food. And so I think those are some of the ways we should think about what we're for when it comes to food is how do I live in gratitude to God? How do I then share the generosity I've received with others? And how do I be generous in order to influence?
Desire to live in gratitude, a desire for community, for relationship, to live and enter into the generosity of God, and that food can be a primary means of that. And I think for me, it's also thinking of where Paul says, like, do you not know that your body's like that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit?
Yeah.
And so there's an element of stewardship of like I want to steward what he's given me well, and I'm not my own. I was bought with a price. And so I have you could see this in a negative or positive way. I think a positive would be better. I have a responsibility to steward this body that are the hands and feet of Christ, and that is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Like there's an actual responsibility there, but also a privilege and an opportunity to like, I would not want to use the word like optimize or something like that, because that's what Brian Johnson is doing.
Yeah.
It's just like biohacking and optimizing, but more so, how can I just steward well his temple so that I'm more equipped and able to live and to do that what he's called me to do.
Yeah. Yeah. The phrase I like to use is living with the grain of creation. That, creation, it has been created in a certain way. There are certain ways that nature works according to the way God has created this world. And things go better when we live with the grain of creation rather than trying to cut against it with, sort of artificial means. But when we're living with the grain of creation, and we can think about this with food, we could think about it with, where we construct buildings. Like if you're trying to construct a building on, some of the unstable marshland that we have here around Savannah, things are not going to go as well, and that building's not going to last. But if you're constructing on, more stable ground, things are going to go much better. And so it's the same way with food and with our bodies. When we're living with the grain of creation, things are going to work better. And then we're going to be more effective hands and feet of Jesus. We're going to be living more in the way God intends us to live. But I kind of like that metaphor of living with the grain of creation, because it feels to me a little bit more fluid and a little bit less rigid than the optimization language.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a really good like knowing what I'm for and what is my, not just against things, but what am I motivated by and what am I actually standing for, living for, moving towards would be. And I really feel like that has become one of my primary motivating, like kind of an aim or an orienting principle is to live with the grain of creation, which makes sense to do because he created me and he created creation and he created those for each other. And like to live with the grain of creation would be to live in accordance with how I was created and what I was in. Like that was the intention the whole time.
Yeah.
So that's obviously going to be the best, and also is a form of worship and honor, where in a world where I'm presented with all manner of distractions and pleasures and other things, to then choose by his grace to not go after the things that are going against the grain of creation, but to then choose to worship and to follow him by living with the grain of creation in spite of that. And then of course, as we do that, the fruit is very evident, and then it kind of reinforces itself because Yeah.
And then you live a life that becomes attractive to other people as well. when they see a life well lived, because there's something that's true about our humanity and about the way we were created that is then on display when we're living with the grain of creation.
What are some of the most significant ways personally that the Lord has led you to live with the grain of creation? Can you think of any particular examples in your life that he has led you into, and what has been the result of that?
Yeah. Well, a big one that I've been thinking about a lot recently that is still a struggle for me is sleep. And sleep is so important to our bodies. And, if you do any research into health, you'll discover how important sleep is.
Yeah.
And it is just kind of weird that God made us to spend about a third of our time that we're alive doing absolutely nothing. And, we could talk about why that may be. I think it speaks to, again, our limitations, the fact that we are dependent creatures and not the creator, who is infinite. But sleep is so fundamental to our health, and yet there's so much in our world that militates against getting the sleep that you need.
It's a disaster.
Yeah. I mean, with digital devices, it's even worse. Like it used to be, a generation or two ago that you might be staying up late reading, and we could even go back further, and maybe you're only reading by candlelight, and so you have this very little thing that's kind of keeping you awake, and it's barely a barrier between you and the night that is going to force you to go to sleep. And then we get from there to electric lighting, and now to our digital devices that shine this bright blue light in our faces, that now we know is deeply impacting our sleep, and making us not able to sleep as deeply and as fully as we need to.
Yeah, because then it's preventing you from falling asleep. But even if you do fall asleep, you're now even though now you're technically sleeping, it's totally disturbed and disrupted and inverse, because when you're staring at bright light, it's signaling to your body basically that it's the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And it's setting your circadian rhythm to start when it's supposed to be ending. And now I'm going to sleep and my body's totally confused. So yeah, it's keeping us up like way into the night by being able to continually entertain and whatever. But then also on top of that, the actual physical light is also greatly disrupting the sleep. So it's doing both of those things simultaneously. Yeah. And that's another one of those things that, like I said, eating, we do every day. We spend like a third of our life eating and a third of our life sleeping.
Yeah.
Like these are important aspects of our life. And we need to think about that.
Yeah. So sleep has been a big one for me that I've been thinking about recently as a way I need to change my habits to live more with the grain of creation.
Right. So what does the grain of creation look like for you in terms of sleep, and how do you balance that with modern life?
Yeah.
Or just kind of where are you with that now?
Yeah. So, I judiciously use the do not disturb feature on my phone, and, I'm stopping notifications so that I'm not getting, pulled into my devices unintentionally without my own intention to use them. So that's part of it. Part of it has been this effort to shift my habits from watching TV or movies before bed. And, like any kind of technology, there's a way that can sort of take over, and it can be like, oh, I watch a movie or a TV show before bed one night a week, and then suddenly it's, every night this has just become a habit because it's so easy to do.
Yeah.
And there's all the, device psychology that's playing into hooking us into these things. So that's been part of it for me, is like, how do I create some boundaries around consuming media, keeping my phone out of my bedroom. This is a thing I've done for years, but I know it's not completely common, and not everyone does this. This is like the bare minimum, life hack to help you sleep better.
Yeah.
Do not have your phone in your bedroom.
That's like, yes, that's bare. That is like necessary.
Yeah.
That is bare minimum.
Yeah. Yeah. You are just like hijacking your own goals in life, and your own, potential health.
Yes.
If you're keeping your phone right next to your bed, if that's the last thing you see and then the first thing you see when you wake up.
That scares me.
Yeah.
And I know that is common. Don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So do not do that. That's really bad for you. So, that's another part of it for me with sleep. And then thinking about, okay, how do I spend this time doing things that are actually going to help me wind down? And so I need to be intentional about like what I'm thinking about. And so let me like have good conversations before bed, or I'm, reading books that I think are important, or are just, maybe good stories. And so I'm still scratching that itch for a meaningful story that I might get from TV or movies, but it's not giving me the same effects that are going to keep me awake.
And because of the light effect, reading by candlelight is super fun. It's also kind of hard. So
Yeah.
candlelight if you can. If not, incandescent lights do not have effect, very minimal, if any, effect on circadian rhythm. So get yourself a incandescent light bulb, which you can get ones that are very dim, like you can get all manner of dim, and they're just naturally more dim, but they are the same exact light spectrum as firelight, whereas LEDs is like complete reverse.
Right.
And so incandescent lights, which is like everything I have here, especially at nighttime, like if I'm going to read something, you can just get like a little lamp and you can get like, you can get incandescent lights that go on like one of the string lights that you might see outside, where it's just all those little bulbs. It's like 4 watts or something. And that just has a nice warm glow, and it's very dim and will not disturb your sleep at all. So that's a good kind of before bed reading light situation. And I don't practice this, but when I did, it worked. Is I got a sleep mask, and what I would do is before going to sleep, I would sit like beside my bed or just sit in the chair in my room, and I would put the sleep mask on and just be in total darkness for even just 5 or 10 minutes. And I could feel my body like turning off, and I could feel my eyes getting heavy. Like there's something physical, and because I've had studied all that kind of stuff, because I was nerding out on light and everything else, I was like, realized that basically high frequency light, like blue light, signals to your body to deplete melatonin. And so often what people will do is they will use a device that depletes their melatonin to 0, and then they will supplement melatonin.
Yeah.
But the natural way to produce melatonin is darkness. And that's simplification, but it does work. Like literally just being in darkness, and you think about going with the grain of creation that darkness, your body is designed in a sophisticated way to basically adapt and go into certain states based on the light conditions. And so if you're in total darkness, your body's like, oh, it's nighttime, we need to sleep. And so I would just put that on and would just be in darkness so I can feel myself actively getting like physically tired. And then there's a separate issue of getting your mind to settle down. But even just sitting in darkness for 5-10 minutes made it tremendously easier for me to sleep, because it would begin the process. And then I just stopped doing that. And then it just occurred to me now that I used to do that, and it worked really well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's about being more fully human and living the way humans were meant to live, versus all of these technologies that are pulling us away from how to be a human being.
What is there any insight or revelation that the Lord has given to you in the last 10 years that comes to mind that you would like to share with people?
That's a great question. I think, very along the lines of what we've been talking about, I think intentionally engaging in embodied practices like cooking and eating are, or like sleeping the way we're meant to sleep can be, intentionally engaging these embodied human practices is so key to battling against, the disembodiment of our technological society, because I think that disembodiment is only going to get worse. Like, it got supercharged by smartphones and social media, and it's going to get supercharged again by AI.
Disembodiment. Yes.
Because, what the internet and smartphones and social media did is give us this idea that we can be present anywhere without our body actually being there. We can take in all this information without actually bodily engaging with the sources of that information. We can have this sort of like omnipresence and omniscience that the human body was never intended to have. And so, we go back to what you said earlier about we're just kind of in our mind, and the mind is the only thing that matters rather than the whole human body. And the church in America has largely been taken along by this disembodiment. I mean, if you think about sort of like generic American Protestantism, like sort of non-denominational Christianity especially is sort of the kind of largest generic Protestantism in America now. It's generally a very disembodied phenomenon, because it's like heavily focused on the transfer of information in the sermon, or it's focused on sort of, I am consuming this musical experience that's done up on stage by the professionals, and the music is turned up so loud that I can't even hear the person next to me singing. And so we've lost the element of congregational singing, and maybe it's all completely dark, and so I don't even see the people next to me. It's this very individualized experience, and all of that just contributes to a very disembodied experience of what church is. And so I think many Christians are not prepared to battle against the disembodiment of technology because we've just embraced disembodiment in so many areas, including in our practice of faith.
So then why are you Anglican?
That's a great question. So there was a lot that drew me to the Anglican tradition initially. So before I was Anglican, I was coming from non-denominational Christianity. And one thing I was seeing was that in a number of different church traditions, there's kind of one thing that's emphasized at the expense of others. So you might have a tradition that's very intellectual at the expense of other things. Or you might have a tradition that's like very emotionally driven and engaging the affections in worship of God at the expense of other parts of ourselves. And when I encountered Anglicanism, I felt like at least the forms of Anglicanism I was encountering were trying to bring together these different threads into a more holistic experience of worship and of life with God. And so, I felt like Anglicanism had a very robust intellectual stream, but it's also a very embodied tradition. I mean, in worship, we are standing and kneeling and engaging our full body in the experience of worship of God. Every week we're eating bread and drinking wine, and we're engaging way more of our senses every single week in church than I was used to engaging in previous experiences of church. And so it felt like a very embodied tradition, right as I was like thinking about smartphones and social media and the effect these things were having. I was encountering this tradition that felt so much more embodied and felt like it took seriously, what does it mean for us to worship God with the grain of creation. How do we worship with the grain of creation rather than sort of this disembodied experience of worship? And I think, if anyone is unsure about the disembodiment of many churches today, look at how easy it was for so many churches to shift what they were doing during COVID and to just go completely online. For many churches, aside from maybe technical difficulties of figuring out the infrastructure of live streaming or whatnot, if you set that aside, you're just flipping a switch and I'm watching this on a screen at home versus just watching it on a stage in the church.
And I feel like a lot of people, even that I knew, spoke about that as if it was the same thing. Like didn't really think that had no issue with that, and didn't really feel like that was even that different. It's like, oh, we'll just watch it.
Right.
It's like, what do you mean?
Right. You're just consuming the same experience that you would consume on a Sunday. So that kind of betrays what people were really thinking of the Sunday morning service, that they felt like this is just an experience that I can consume in the same way I would consume a TV show off of my laptop. I'm just watching the church service and that's that. So when you see how easy it was for so many churches to shift online, that shows you how disembodied their experience of church is, because then we can shift to something that's literally disembodied, where I'm not even physically present with the people, and somehow we say we're worshiping together. And so, this is not to say that God cannot transcend the boundaries of us being in separate places. And, I understand the choices that many people made in 2020 in the face of COVID, and why people had to shift to different ways of doing church. But I think the ease by which so many people did that shows us how disembodied their experience of church already was.
Yeah.
And so for me, Anglicanism felt like it was a tradition that engaged worship with the grain of creation, that, I'm literally tasting and seeing that the Lord is good every Sunday. And that was a big deal for me. Or, the tradition of daily prayer with the prayer book. I think the Book of Common Prayer is an act of genius out of the English Reformation, because literally we're all praying from the same page. And the ideal of the Anglican tradition is that we have this daily rhythm of morning and evening prayer, that we're all engaging in this same rhythm of daily prayer, literally from the same pages of this prayer book. It's giving us this very grounded experience of worship that's grounded in really intentional, thoughtful practice. I had been in so many churches where we were making things up every single week, and every single Sunday felt like we're just kind of making up how to do church again every single week, when this is something that the church has done for thousands of years. And so, sometimes a mistake people will have if they're not from a liturgical tradition is to think that the liturgical tradition and the value of liturgy means a denigration of extemporaneous prayer and, scripted and pre-written forms of worship. And in my experience of Anglicanism, that is not the case. I think in Anglicanism at its best is a valuing of both of those things. Mm-hmm. Like extemporaneous prayer is, certainly a part of our worship as well. And we really value liturgy as this intentional formation, because the reality is we don't live in a culture that's forming us well in the ways God wants us to be formed. We've talked about some of those today, the ways that our culture is deforming us, but we don't live in a culture that's forming us well in the ways that God would want us to be formed into the image of Christ. And so what liturgy is it's this intentional formation, that I am submitting myself to an intentional formation in Christ-likeness, in a community of other people who are also all pursuing the same thing. We're all running after the same thing and submitting ourselves to this intentional formation. One of the geniuses of the English Reformation was bringing the intentional formation of the monasteries to more people. And so, There's the Benedictine stream, emerging from Saint Benedict and his monastic rule was a big part and remains a big part of the Anglican tradition. And now part of the genius of the English Reformation was simplifying the many prayer offices that the monastery had during the day into the 2 morning and evening prayer and making this more accessible to the general populace. But the idea is that the monasteries have a very intentional formation because they're saying, we want to be a certain way, and so we're going to dedicate our entire life to that. And that means we're, eschewing spouse and family relationships. That means we're living in the monastery. That means we're saying no to other kinds of employment. Like there's all of this like radical no to this, so it can be a radical yes to God. And that's what the monastery is all about. And in the English Reformation, there's an idea of, through the prayer book, through the liturgy, bringing that sort of very intentional formation to the rest of the Christians who are not the super Christians in the monasteries, but saying actually all of us need to submit ourselves to this kind of intentional formation so that we can be for the true formation in the image of Christ that we're meant to be. And so those are some of the reasons why I'm Anglican. I think it's a very embodied tradition, and it's a tradition that through its liturgy is intentional about what we're being formed in and how we're living our lives. And I think in the world that we live in today, we desperately need intentional formation, and we desperately need structure that comes from outside ourselves to guide us towards what we want to be guided towards, which fundamentally is worshiping God and becoming more like Him. Because we have so many things that are intentionally designed to guide us away from that path, whether it's technology, whether it's food, whether it's 100 other things we could probably name that are so intentionally designed in our society to form us in a certain way that we would say as Christians is not what we want to be formed in. It's not our ultimate goal.
Correct.
And so we need to be intentional with our formation.
And you feel that when you found Anglicanism, it was a proper balance and integration of those things, and was being intentional about that formation, which I've been, the Lord called me to morning prayer, as he was just describing, and that's been probably the most fruitful and formative and beneficial practice in my life. I think maybe even by far. Like I've seen, and it hasn't been obvious, like it wasn't, but as I looked back, I'm like, wow, this kind of just, I don't even know how it happened. The Lord just called me to it and gave me the grace to kind of commit myself to morning prayer. And I find that many days, like if I stayed up on a screen or something, and I still will go to morning prayer anyways, and I might be there and I might be like dazed and confused and half asleep. But because it's become a daily habit, and like our tongue is a muscle, you think of like muscle memory, like even my tongue is a muscle where I'm saying these prayers, and it's kind of like half liturgy, half, what were you calling it? Extemporaneous prayer. Yeah. And we're going through like the liturgy, the beginning, I find that between the standing, the sitting, the kneeling, and saying the prayers, sometimes I will be not even present, or I will be lost in thought, and then I will realize that I've stood up and I'm saying the prayer, and I wasn't even anywhere near there. And I'm not saying that's good, like, but then I noticed that, and I notice how cool it is that it's become part of me. It's not like something I'm going to or something that I'm doing. It has formed me such that it's part of who I am, and the words are written on my tongue, where I'm like, I'll just be saying this whole prayer without even realizing that I'm saying it, because it's just been programmed in. And obviously that could become just going through the motions, like saying it and not even meaning it or even thinking about it. So I'm not saying that being lost in thought is good, but then I can, because then when I notice that, then I'll return, and that will actually be a an impetus to me to mean it, mean it more, to really pay attention to what I'm saying and to mean it. But I've been very encouraged by how formative that's been in ways that I wasn't even anticipating or aware of or doing on purpose, but that it really has had that effect, and I would strongly recommend morning prayer every single morning in the nave at 8 a.m. and it's great. So you are we can close today by having you share when you're moving and to where and why.
Yeah. So moving in just a couple weeks, early August, to Gainesville, Florida. And I will be taking part in a pastoral residency there at an Anglican church down in Gainesville. And so essentially this is a 2-year position where I'll be taking part in lots of different ministries in the church, learning from those things. And God willing, I will also be ordained a priest while I'm there. So about 2 months ago, I was ordained a deacon, and the tradition is to serve as a deacon for about a year before then becoming a priest. So Lord willing, during my time in Gainesville in this pastoral residency, I'll also become a priest. And then hopefully, God willing, out of that 2-year experience, I'll then move on to plant an Anglican church in the Tampa area. So that's currently the calling that my wife and I have discerned, is that the Lord is calling us to plant an Anglican church in the Tampa, Florida area, which we're really excited about because I think just temperamentally, I and my wife Julie also just really enjoy that kind of front lines evangelistic ministry, pushing the kingdom outward into new spaces. Yeah. And so church planting is sort of a natural draw for us in that sense. And then, we're also kind of big city people. We've spent a lot of time in larger cities. And so moving to a place like Tampa, that's a large city with very little Anglican presence right now, just feels like an exciting place to be. A place with a lot of challenges, of course, but it's a sort of ministry that I'm really excited about. And really fundamentally for me, church planting is about bringing everything we've been talking about today and this like life of embodiment and living with the grain of creation to people who are desperately in need of that.
Closing statement. As we go into ever increasing disembodiment and what you called a personhood crisis, could you speak to anyone, but especially those who really struggle with identity or personhood, speak to them, what their identity, what gives them value, what makes them human? Obviously, it's a huge thing, but as you can, any kind of closing statement to address that personhood crisis.
Yeah. So I would say we live in a culture that tells you to look within yourself to find out who you are, and that, either you look within and discover who you are by looking within yourself, or you look within and then sort of create your identity. And either of those is a mistaken path and is not how, for most of human history, humans have understood who they are. Our identity has always been something that comes from without, that we come to understand in the context of other people. And I would say fundamentally, you need to understand your identity in relation to the God who created you and who deeply loves you and deeply desires relationship with you. And so, we, so many of us struggle with anxiety and depression from the pressure that we find to either discover or create our identity by looking within. Because at the end of the day, you are going to reach the bottom of that search, and it won't be satisfied in the way that you want it to be, that search for identity within yourself. Because you are going to find that you are not the person that you ideally want to be, because we are all of two minds about things. You know, Paul says in Romans that I don't do the things I want to do, and I do the things I don't want to do. And all of us are going to encounter that struggle within ourselves. And so looking within is never going to satisfy that search for identity. But when we understand ourselves in relation to the God who created us and who deeply loves us and deeply desires relationship with us, that's where we find a durable source of identity that can withstand all the things the world is trying to throw at us. That's where we find a source of identity that can't be changed by my failures. God's love for me and his desire to be in relationship with me isn't changed by my failures. I think that's so freeing for us. It isn't changed by the way the world is coming at us and saying we need to be all these sorts of things. But God's love for me and desire for a relationship with me is a fundamental identity that can't be shaken. And that's who we are as people, no matter what happens with AI. Maybe in our lifetime, we're going to see the machines take over and we're going to see some kind of Wall-E world. But even in that world, fundamentally who we are is that we are loved by God, and that he created us and desires a relationship with us. And we may live in a world in which it is very difficult to be human beings, and in which all the things we're trying to find our identity in now are completely stripped away from us. But in that space, that fundamental identity in relation to God remains true. And that is the only foundation in a world that is only becoming more chaotic and more difficult to understand. That is the only firm foundation to build our life on.
And that is the answer. Not to fear or to stress or get obsessed about all those things, or to try to find security somewhere, but to know what is already true in Christ and God's love for us, and that he created all this and he knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And so we serve him. Amen. Ralph, thank you for coming on today. I think we've covered a good amount of territory, and I know you got to get going, I think. So it was an honor.
Thank you. This was great.
And it was funny. I didn't announce it at the beginning, but we had started an episode, and somebody didn't hit record. So this was take 2, and it was good. It was toward the beginning, so it was okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation, and I thank you for the heart and the mind and the spirit that you have given to Ralph. And I pray that you would bless and prosper his family as they go. But Lord, not as the world would bless and prosper, but that they would bear much fruit for your kingdom, that they would be filled with all the fruit of the Spirit. And Lord, I thank you that you've gone before them and prepared the way. Lord, we thank you that you have given us that firm, unshakable identity that we receive from you and from your finished work. And thank you for all those watching who are beloved children of God. And I pray that you would grant firmness of understanding and belief and faith in their identity in you, that you have given freely to us by faith. And so may we walk as ministers of light, and may we walk in love all our days. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.